How many people here said, God damn, why did the United States try to overthrow that government and overrun us with refugees? Precisely nobody. But I would like a German chancellor to stand up and say, no. They think this is a goddamn game and that they're going to reposition the pieces on the global chessboard. The politicians actually follow the checklist. It's not like we have a democracy where the public opinion shapes the foreign policy. No, 98, 99% that this came out of a lab. So the country's always at the knife edge between stability and panic. Huh? What about the period we're interested in? No, that's still in a lawsuit. I've never been back on mainstream US television from that moment. We must prepare for war with China by 2027. Crazy. It actually says that in the document.
Welcome to a new fantastic episode, Deep Dive, today with Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Mr. Sachs, it's an honor to have you on my show.
Yeah, it's an honor for me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, I'm too. And before we begin, let me briefly introduce you to my audience. Perhaps not anybody knows you in Germany. You are internationally very well known, of course. Public policy expert and author. You served as a professor at Columbia University and have advised numerous governments around the world. You are also the author of several influential books, including The End of Poverty and The Price of Civilization. You also were an advisor to former UN Secretary Generals like Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon, and you played a key role in shaping global development policies. Throughout your career, you have been a strong advocate for policy solutions to address some of the world's most pressing challenges, like most recently the war in Ukraine, of course. Today I would like to talk to you about your new book. It's called in German Diplomatie oder Desaster, Diplomacy or Disaster, which I definitely can recommend. I read it. It's not too thick. It's very well written. Even in Germany, I can assure you it's a good book in German. And I recommend it to all my viewers, of course. You will find the link of the book in the show notes. So we are living in historic times, I would say. Right now, we saw the new Trump administrations in the US taking over the office. So I would like to ask you, as an US citizen, what's your impression after the first couple of days of the new administration?
Well, we're always in for interesting times with Donald Trump because he's able to surprise. But I think the real story of our times is more continuity than shocks, actually. We're in a period of basic long-term change. We're in a period where the rise of China has reshaped the world. We're in a period of technological miracle, but technological disruption. We're in a time of geopolitical change. We're in a time of environmental crisis. So whichever president is in power, whichever chancellor is in power, there's some pretty fundamental things going on. And unfortunately, U.S. foreign policy has been pretty lousy, not just with Biden, who I couldn't stand, but basically for the last 30 years. I'm hoping Trump will change things. We'll see. I never hold my breath because U.S. foreign policy is pretty deeply set, and the presidents come and go, but the policies stay pretty much online, and that's my worry because we're not in a good direction.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you're very vocal about that, and that's what I really appreciate. In the subtitle of the book, you say it's a paradigm shift. So I think, is it the most influential paradigm shift in your lifetime we're seeing right now? Because so much things are actually crumbling. We see geopolitical wars in Ukraine. We see Hamas, Israel. We see economic problems in Europe, new energy policy in Germany, and so on. The rise and fall of nations. We see the BRIC countries, of course, as well. So what do you think? Is it a historic paradigm shift we're witnessing right now? And can we solve these problems of this paradigm shift with the old solutions, with the old recipes?
It's very, very disappointing for me, I could put it in one way, that we have all these crises, because these are really man-made crises to a large extent. They should not have happened. The war in Ukraine never should have happened. It's not just Putin's fault that one day he decided to be Peter the Great. This is ridiculous. This is a problem of Western policy vis-a-vis Russia that built up over many, many years, and the war could have been avoided at so many times, but it wasn't. And for me, and speaking in Germany, it's interesting because I was a guest of Chancellor Helmut Kohl in 1990-91. Also Hans-Dietrich Genscher in 1990-91, because I was an advisor to the Polish government in economics. I was an advisor to President Gorbachev. I was an advisor to President Yeltsin. And the point I want to make is it was a time of incredible optimism. Germany was being reunified. Peace was coming to Europe. The Cold War was over. The Soviet Union under Gorbachev and then Russia under Yeltsin wanted close relations with the United States and with Europe. My God, we could have had just what we wanted, and we blew it. And I put a lot of blame on the United States for that, because rather than wanting peace, the U.S. wanted victory. And if you just want victory, if you want to say, okay, now we're number one, now we do what we want, now we're in charge, now we tell the Russians what to do, now we expand NATO, rather than having the attitude of peace, well, you blow this. So for me, I look at this now over a 36-year stretch, actually, because it's back in 1989 that I was an advisor to the Eastern European governments. That's what brought me to Germany at the time. That's what brought me to meet the leadership here and to talk to them about the changes after the fall of the wall and after the end of communism in Central and Eastern Europe. And so it's interesting for me to reflect on this here. We could have done so much better. So to answer your question, of course our problems can be solved. Oddly, we're richer, we have better technology, we have near miraculous technologies to solve all these problems, but are we solving our problems? No, we're fighting wars, talking about Europe getting ready for World War III. This is insane. This is not what we should be doing. Can you imagine leading German politicians saying we must prepare for war? Or Rutte, now the Secretary General of NATO, speaking so terribly, nonsensically, oh, we must prepare for war with Russia. Why don't you sit down and talk with Russia? That's the point of the book, diplomacy or disaster.
Yeah, for me, it's also horrible to listen to all the bad war mongers actually in Europe. And I'm now 49 years old, and I never heard German politicians talk so much about war and say, okay, we have to go to Russia, we have to fight in Russia, we have to we have to have a victory over Putin and Russia. And because I grew up in the time of peace, actually, you know, Chancellor Kohl, for example, and the end of the Soviet Union and everything, and it was so actually a golden future ahead of us. And so I'm actually getting goosebumps when I'm thinking about it. For example, politicians from the Green Party, which actually started as an anti-war party, talk about we have to bring more munition, more weapons, we have to fight. So something is going wrong, something is changing actually. And
you know, we lost the most basic point, which is diplomacy.
Exactly.
You actually talk to the other side. Willy Brandt had the idea in much more difficult times. But here, when we actually had the chance to talk, when we had peace, when we had the cooperation, we lost it. And I can tell you, I must admit, I'm not interfering in your politics, but I'm talking about the world. Your foreign minister is a warmonger, in my opinion. I can't believe the words that come out of her mouth, because a foreign minister is a diplomat. A foreign minister should be not in Kyiv every day talking about the war and we will fight and Russia's terrible, but actually in Moscow talking to Moscow also. Moscow, Russia's not going away. No. You better deal with it. Actually, the irony of all of this as an economist is, and I think we all know it and we see it, Germany and Russia are complementary economies. Things were working, actually, when the connections were there. Germany has technology. It's got world-leading, world-class manufacturing. Russia has resources galore. Yeah. The combination of the two was extraordinarily beneficial to both sides. And now all of this is broken. And it's broken, I can tell you, for no reason. It's strange for me, you know, I feel a bit like a kid still, but I'm an old guy now. I was there. I was there in 1989, not as a young person like you were, but I was already leading an economic delegation. I, by the way, sat in the Kremlin in December 1991 with Boris Yeltsin right across from me, and Boris Yeltsin saying to me and saying to my colleagues, the Soviet Union has ended, and Russia now is in charge, and we want peace and cooperation. And I heard that literally to my ear, facing Boris Yeltsin.
Was he sober?
And he was absolutely sober on that day, I can tell you.
Okay.
And he was not only sober, he was inspiring. And it was amazing. And can you imagine being in the Kremlin and hearing this? Because that already was... I couldn't even believe that this was happening. But what did the U.S. do? It's interesting, and it's one of my main points, because I saw it with my own eyes. In 1990, as German reunification was being debated, the question was, what is going to happen to the Soviet Union in terms of its security? And the idea so clearly expressed by everybody to Gorbachev was, when Germany reunifies, the West will not take advantage of you. You know, the German reunification was literally the end of World War II because there was no treaty. I think people in Germany know this. Nobody in the United States understands this. But this was the end of World War II. It had to be negotiated. On February 9th, 1990, James Baker, our Secretary of State, said to Gorbachev, NATO will not move 1 inch eastward. Now, a whole generation of phony propagandists tries to deny this, but it's true. It's a conspiracy
theory, yes.
It's true, and you can find all the documentation, because it wasn't on one occasion, it was repeated. And Hans-Dietrich Genscher, unambiguously, no question, this was the deal. Germany would reunify, and NATO would not move eastward. Then, of course, the Soviet Union ended in December 1991, and immediately those dunderheads in Washington said, aha, now we run the show, now we can do what we want. And they started planning the expansion of NATO, contrary to the commitment. And our presidents are not so good one after the other. Bill Clinton, my opinion, a bit of a jerk, I have to say. He, in 1994, approves the plan to expand NATO. You know, this is 4 years after this commitment to end World War II on the basis of peace. And the rest is history in a way, because the expansion kept going, kept going, kept going. The Russians kept saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? Our media kept lying and lying, because they got into the mode of saying, oh, we never promised anything. We don't have to say anything. Our politicians remained silent. Interestingly, in 2008, kind of the decisive crossroad when George W. Bush Jr., not the cleverest man in the world, I have to say, pushed through the Russian red line and demanded at the 2008 NATO summit that Ukraine and Georgia would become members of NATO. And what's very interesting is Chancellor Merkel was there. Not only there, she was resisting. And we know everything about this now. She's just written memoirs about this. Other people have told me. I spoke at the time to European leaders who said to me, "What is your president doing? Why? This is reckless. We said we wouldn't do this." But, you know, European leaders are weak when it comes to U.S. pressure. And Chancellor Merkel successfully resisted a specific date and a specific plan, but she didn't resist the bottom line, which was that in 2008, the commitment was made that Ukraine would become a member of NATO. And until this day, this is official policy of Germany, it's official policy of the United States, and it's the cause of this war, fundamentally. And what the mass media told about this war has been a lie, because it has not explained this most basic fact, which is clear as can be, and I saw it. And I know, by the way, which is also very interesting for me, not only did I watch it from more than 30 years, but I remember vividly 2008, and I heard from, I'll say, one European leader in office today who just was shocked at Bush's behavior, but today, silent. Today, pro-US. Today, no debate, no truth, no story. Well, this is why you have a foreign minister who's a warmonger. This is why we're adrift in NATO calling for 5% of GDP in military spending, crazy things, because there's no honesty that diplomacy could have avoided the whole damn thing.
Yeah, talking to each other. You're absolutely right. And if you mention something like this in Germany or in Europe, you're a conspiracy theorist.
I know.
You say the
a
war...
Putin apologist.
Exactly. Yeah. You're a fan of Putin, because if you say the war started already early in Ukraine, like in 2014, for example, then you're a conspiracy theorist. And if you say, okay, but there was this agreement not to expand the NATO to the east, and they said, no, it's not true, and so on and so forth. So this is actually the situation we are in right now. Do you think that the so-called deep state is in power of our Mrs. Baerbock and of the European policy? You think it's like, is there a plan behind it to destroy the relationship between Eastern Europe or Russia and Germany and Europe?
The idea of dominating Russia is very deep and very long-standing in the West. So, you know, basically the day that World War II ended, the United States shifted from defeating Germany to preparing for war with the Soviet Union. It literally was about a 2-month period, even though the Soviet Union and the US were allies in World War II against Hitler. As soon as the war with Germany ended, the US said, now our next enemy is the Soviet Union. So first of all, this animus goes back a long time. Now, we had the Cold War. We had Willy Brandt again saying, we don't have to blow up everything. We can talk to the other side. There can be Ostpolitik. There can be a way to diminish tensions. And he was absolutely right and won the Nobel Prize for that. And Gorbachev, in the end, it wasn't that the Soviet Union was defeated, though it was in crisis. There was a man of peace who said, let's just stop this. We need to recuperate, and we need peace. By the way, it is not true that the Soviet Union had no choice but to do what it did. Gorbachev had choices. Gorbachev could have gone to war. Gorbachev could have cracked down. Gorbachev could have done what the Soviet Union did in Czechoslovakia in 1968 or Hungary. But no, he said, we will change. This was a choice. And if the West had been magnanimous about this, we actually would have had this. Now, what I was there, as I've been discussing, I couldn't imagine that we wouldn't take the opportunity. I was giddy with happiness that day sitting in the Kremlin.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even, you can't imagine, but it's hard for me to even describe. Your whole life is the Cold War, the Iron Curtain, the Soviet Union, the missile crisis, and so forth. And suddenly, you're sitting in front of the Russian president who's telling you, we just want peace. It didn't even cross my mind that we could ever revert to this. Now, I'll say all of this because I want to give a good and precise answer to the question, what is the plan? If you look back now, I did not understand it in 1991 for sure, because I couldn't even imagine it. The U.S. plan never really changed with the end of the Cold War. Yes, the Soviet Union was gone, but Russia was still the enemy to be dismembered, to be weakened, to be broken apart. We use the term in the United States to decolonize Russia. Brzezinski talked about Russia in a three-way federation. These people are crazy because the U.S. thinks it moves the pieces around the global chessboard. That's actually Brzezinski's book in 1997, The Global Chessboard. They think this is a goddamn game and that they're going to reposition the pieces on the global chessboard. Well, Russia, by the way, just a footnote, still has 6,000 nuclear warheads and 1,600 of them are actively deployed, and it's a very rich country, a very sophisticated country, a very proud country, a very large country, the largest in the world by far. And so the idea that the U.S. is going to move the pieces around and break apart Russia is so mind-boggling in its stupidity that someone would say, like to a 12-year-old, grow up, grow up. It's not going to be like this. Why don't we just have peace? But there are grown-ups in Washington. There are chess players on this global chessboard. So they continued the idea that the U.S. had defeated the Soviet Union, not that Gorbachev had brought about an era of peace, but that the U.S. had defeated the Soviet Union. And now Russia's still too big. It's still an obstacle. Now we must go on to defeat Russia. I believe this is what you would say is the deep state strategy of the United States. I don't think anything in retrospect, as I think about it and learn about it, of course, and watch it every day over the next 30 years, for them, 1991 was not the decisive point. It was just a step on the way to the ultimate goal. What is the ultimate goal? Unrivaled power. And Russia's still too big. It's still a rival. The United States does not want rivals anywhere. And so they continued this idea. And it's fascinating to read Brzezinski's ideas about all of this in 1997, because I knew him. He was actually very nice to me because I was a young economist working in Poland. Poland was his native land, and he wanted my success as an advisor. So he was very, very nice to me. But boy, like a Polish patriot, he hated Russia and wanted to do in Russia in some sense. So in 1997, in his book, he says, we will move eastward with NATO and with Europe, the Union and NATO both. And then he has a whole chapter, well, what will Russia do? Russia won't like this. And then he says, what can Russia do? And he goes through all the options. Could Russia align with China? No way, he says. Could Russia align with a regional power like Iran? No way. He ends up, and it's fun to read in quotation marks, though it's incredibly painful to read because it's so wrong. Yeah. He ends up saying Russia will have no choice but to submit or to accede to Western power. Now, another interesting bit to understand all of this, the way the CIA works, and the CIA is kind of the long-term driver of policy. It doesn't have to get elected, doesn't have to tell the public anything, doesn't have to admit anything, doesn't have to describe anything, doesn't have to justify anything. So it holds the long-term policy. The way that it works is to destabilize the opponent in whatever nasty, provocative, unprincipled way it can. Maybe it's coups and assassinations. Maybe it's bringing thousands or tens of thousands out to the streets, which costs money and organization. And where do you think that money and organization comes from? It doesn't just arise spontaneously. If anyone's watching, no, sorry, the Maidan is not just people pouring out to the streets in the end of 2013, as much as you might want to believe that. I'm sorry, this is a paid operation. It requires a lot of investment in media. It requires new television stations, new social media, distribution points, training. It's a lot of money. Where do you think that money comes from? Well, the U.S. has a lot of money for exactly this kind of thing. So the U.S., with CIA in the lead typically, destabilizes. So in 1998, just as an example, suddenly there's a committee in the United States. The committee, I don't remember exactly the title, but it's something like the Committee for the Defense of Chechnya. Are you kidding? America. And then you look at the people on the list. It's kind of the blue chip neoconservatives of the United States, including Brzezinski and all the warmongers. Do they even know where Chechnya is on the map?
They can put it on
the map.
Do
they give a damn about one Chechen person? Of course not. They have no clue. But they know that we should poke Russia. Yeah. We should have the jihadists there. We should be arming the opposition and so forth. And then when Putin says this, no, that's crazy conspiracy theory. That's how it works, by the way.
Yeah.
And after you've grown up and seen this stuff close up many times, you come to see it. So you asked me, what is the plan? The plan wasn't to weaken Europe. I don't believe that. But the plan was to break apart Russia, regime change in Russia, get rid of Putin. They said it. Yeah. Biden can't help himself. He's a stupid, and maybe not all with it mentally, even back in 2022. He said, yeah, that man can't stay in power. Are you kidding? How would you like a Russian president saying that chancellor can't stay in power, that president can't stay in power? You'd say that's a cause of war. That's crazy. That's a statement of an American president. So that is actually how they operate. And it's very interesting. There's another paper people can look up online by the Rand Corporation. The Rand Corporation is kind of the war think tank. It's literally the think tank of the American Air Force, and it invented a lot of game theory, which is a kind of crazy device to figure out how to move those pieces on the board to win, so-called. And in 2019, the Rand Corporation produced a report, how do we extend, essentially, how do we bother, antagonize, and weaken Russia? It's a strange kind of foreign policy that your goal is to weaken, to actively weaken. Aside, you're not at war with them, but they talk about, yes, push NATO enlargement, even if it's not going to happen, antagonize them, worry them, stir up things, create trouble, arm Ukraine. They've got all the options there, and then you realize, yeah, the politicians actually follow the checklist one by one by one. One more example of this that is fascinating to me, because I try to understand the mindset of these people in Washington. I know them. I've known them personally. I don't like warmongers. I don't like the whole approach. I just find it completely reckless and ridiculous and childish. But on the 30th anniversary of a newscast from 1994, played in December 2024, just last month, there was a debate on our public television. fascinating to watch between a very esteemed diplomat named Jack Matlock, who was America's last ambassador to the Soviet Union, and Henry Kissinger.
Yeah.
So the two of them were on, and a very skilled, we used to have skilled newscasters who could do a good interview, interviewed them in a debate about whether NATO should expand. And mind you, this was 1994. The answer was no, the answer should have been no, we promise not to. But anyway, Matlock was a skilled diplomat. I knew him personally. I knew him from the Soviet Union when he was ambassador. And I was there working with Gorbachev's team and Yeltsin's team. And he said, why would we expand NATO? That would just stir up trouble. Kissinger, incoherently in my mind, says, well, yes, we should expand NATO. And the interviewer asks him, well, is there a threat, Mr. Kissinger? He says, no, there's no threat. Well, could it antagonize Russia? Yes, it could antagonize Russia. Well, why should we do it then, Mr. Kissinger? And he says, well, if you can't antagonize Russia when it's weak, what are you going to do when it's strong? And I thought, okay, you take it for granted that the game is antagonizing.
Yeah.
And then the question is, why not now? Because we're going to do it later. He couldn't imagine that maybe there could be peace and a future without antagonizing Russia. But in 1994, when there was no threat, when he acknowledged there was no threat, when there was no reason to stir up things, he said, yes, of course, because they're weak. That's the American mindset. So, and that's the answer to the question. Yeah. What is the policy? It's amazing. The policy consistently, from Clinton to Bush Jr. to Obama to Trump 1 to Biden, and here we are today, has been American dominance, and it has been weaken the opponents. And my guess is, I'm sorry to say it, really sorry to say it, but my guess is that this continues on this course, even though it is a reckless, dangerous, foolish, provocative, unsuccessful policy. It's so deeply embedded in the American mentality that Trump may do it different ways, but he'll be told everywhere, we have to weaken China, we have to antagonize China, we have to bother China. He could be smarter, but that's the American way. Bother the other side until there's a crisis. And then you say, oh my God, what do we do? Now, final point, I would say, where's Europe? Where is Europe on this? Where is Europe when the European leaders knew in 2008? Absolutely. Chancellor Merkel knew. She writes about how she knew. She semi-caved. I'll give her credit. There was no timeline and so-called map or a plan for membership. But she caved. Europe caved. And once it caved, it stood in line. Until this day, it's the leaders, at least, keep saying the same thing. Unprovoked war by Russia. Yeah. We needed to gear up for World War and so on. And to this day, they don't engage in diplomacy. And if you have a foreign minister that doesn't understand diplomacy, that just understands warmongering or just goes to the allied side, but not to discuss with the other side. My God, what a world.
Yeah. So we see the heart of this policy is the heartland theory from Mackinder. It's also in Brzezinski's book, actually. And
it is.
Till today, it's the policy of the CIA, of the deep state, and of the US, of course, to separate Russia and Europe and to weaken, actually, Russia. So what do you think? Will the warmongering escalate? Will we see perhaps a big war between the West and Russia?
Look, for me, the overwhelming, simple reality, really the simple reality is Russia has 1,600 actively deployed nuclear warheads. The United States has the same number. It is so mind-boggling that we even ask this question. I don't think people understand. We're not in good hands. We're not in safe hands. Accidents happen. There are a lot of stupid people around. I've been in public policy for 45 years, actively, professionally. I've advised dozens of governments, individual governments, maybe hundreds by now. I've seen a lot of governments. I've seen a lot of things I can't believe, couldn't believe at the time. We should not come close to the nuclear edge. Any politician that says, we're not going to accept Putin's bluff is an idiot. I don't want to hear from anybody. I don't want to hear from anybody in NATO. I don't want to hear from any foreign minister. I don't want to hear from any president what they know about Putin's bluff or what they don't know, because they get things wrong all the time. They don't know what the generals are telling Putin. They don't know what some hothead is going to react. They don't know what the Russian nationalists are perceiving. They don't know what the threats that Russians are perceiving. And our, I think, not functional president, so I don't really know who made the decisions in the last year or two, but our president supposedly authorized the use of U.S. Attack-M missiles and British Storm Shadow missiles, which is the same technology, which depends on U.S. personnel to launch those missiles and to guide those missiles. It is tantamount to a Russian submarine off the coast of the United States lobbing missiles into Pennsylvania, and we're supposed to say, yeah, don't worry about it. They won't retaliate. This is essentially what's happening right now. And we're betting the survival of the planet on Putin's bluff as we attack, not by a proxy Ukraine, but literally by U.S. personnel who target and guide those missile systems. And this is going on to this day. And by the way, I've only met Zelensky once. And when I met him, it was 2019, before the war. And he did something he was very good at. He did a comedy skit. But as president, I don't want the world in his hands. I don't want the fate of the world in his hands. I don't want to listen to him about escalating. I don't want to listen to him about putting NATO troops. I want him to shut up, to tell you the truth. And while it's a little crude to say it that way, I don't want these leaders provoking a nuclear war. And I have been around long enough, and I wrote a book about the Cuban Missile Crisis and its aftermath. I've studied this. I know about the accidents. I've talked to the great historians of the nuclear age, like Martin Sherwin, who wrote the book on which the now famous movie Oppenheimer was based. I've talked to them at length. We are playing with self-destruction right now, and we should not be doing so. And I know, because I speak to the Russian side, and I speak to the Chinese, and I work at the UN, and I speak to diplomats all over the world, there is a way to peace. There's a way through diplomacy. You have to talk to the other side.
You think Donald Trump will talk to Putin? He will activate diplomacy again?
It's possible, because we don't really know what was going on in the White House in the last 4 years, by the way. I always thought, I have thought all along, by the way, that Biden wasn't all there. And certainly in the last year, that became fairly commonplace view. But now it's being stated by insiders explaining pretty bad, and maybe going back even to early parts of the term. we'll no doubt.
Who was in charge? Who was in charge?
Yeah, so we'll learn more about this, I'm sure, by gossip and by memoirs and by people telling stories. We heard a story of our Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, talking about the fact that Biden didn't know about an important decree that he signed
2 weeks earlier.
Yeah. And he didn't know about it. So who's been doing this? We don't know. My guess, Jake Sullivan was maybe Blinken, maybe Lloyd Austin, maybe some political advisors, maybe Joe Biden. Who knows?
Maybe Obama. Who knows?
Who knows? But it is not good. It also shows, by the way, there's this kind of fundamental arrogance of power that says, we can fake this. We just keep the boss out of the press conferences. We keep him out of this. We don't have a meeting here. And they think it's their job to fake this rather than saying, Mr. President, maybe you ought to step aside because, this is the United States and there's some very difficult issues to deal with. They didn't do that. They faked it until the end. So we don't really know the story. Biden was never a guy of great judgment, but, in this state, things were obviously worse. So could Trump do differently? The reason I go into all of that is Trump is there, at least. He wants to talk to his counterparts. He wants to talk to Putin. He wants to talk to President Xi. That by itself is half the game.
Diplomacy, yeah.
It's amazing. Maybe not surprising to people, but it is surprising to game theorists. Just letting people talk, not being able to bind themselves with fancy contracts or anything else. Just talking humanizes a situation, tones things down, calms things down, allows you to find a way out. And there was not one discussion, I'm pretty sure, not one, between February 2022 and the end of the Biden period during a war between Biden and Putin. And I think probably because Biden was not mentally up to it. I think it's the best explanation because simply the warmongering probably wouldn't be enough to stop the talk, but I think that they just wanted to shield the boss from having to be in a place where he'd have to answer something and it could be really problematic. So my guess is that they were hiding this fact from Putin as well, whatever, from the public and from Putin and so forth. I don't think anything is hidden. I think everybody understands what was going on. But this meant no active diplomacy. Now, your chancellor, has talked to Putin, and he has said there's no compromise, and I talked and I tried, but it's impossible, and so forth. Or he's said that in the past. But the truth, and with all respect, the U.S. is the one that calls the shots on things like NATO, precisely like 2008 proved. The U.S. is the one with the nuclear weapons. The U.S. is the one with the intermediate nuclear force weapons. The U.S. is the one that pulled out of the INF Treaty in 2019. The U.S. is the one stationing intermediate range missiles in Germany and elsewhere. The U.S. is the one stationing Aegis missiles. The U.S. is the one that pulled out of the anti-ballistic missile treaty. So with all respect to a German chancellor, you need the United States in there. Not only, I want Europe to have diplomacy, but it's a little bit understandable why it's not enough for a German chancellor to say, I'm against NATO, don't worry, as long as I'm chancellor, NATO won't expand. What the Russians have seen is that doesn't count for all that much. In 2008, it didn't stop the commitment to expand NATO. In 2015, by the way, again, and here, not good for Chancellor Merkel, really not good. Russia was the guarantor of the Minsk II agreement.
Yeah.
This was the aim to stop the war back in 2015. It was actually blessed and voted unanimously by the UN Security Council. There was the so-called Normandy process where Germany and France were the guarantors. And the United States and the Ukrainian regime said, don't worry about it. And Germany and France just let it pass. And then Mrs. Merkel said in an interview, which was really
not lucky,
really unpleasant to listen to and sad, because I don't even believe what she said about her thoughts then. She said, well, this was just to buy time. You know what?
For Ukraine.
I don't believe it. I think she entered into it as guarantor in good faith. I give her more credit than she gives herself right now.
And then came the pressure from the US.
But I think the pressure from the US is really awful. But I would like a German chancellor to stand up and say, no, we are Europe. This is our security. And that, Mr. President, is not a good idea. That's what I want a German chancellor to say.
Do you remember there was a G7 meeting in Germany, I think on the island of Rügen, and Mrs. Merkel, she cried actually. Obama was on the table and she cried, and everybody in Germany was asking, why is she crying? Perhaps this was the pressure because she knew that Minsk II will not come to a conclusion or come to success or something. Because everybody was talking about it. What's happening there? Why is she crying on the table with G7 presidents and everything? So nobody knows, but she talked to Obama and then she cried in public.
You know,
very famous pictures.
A European leader said to me, I obviously won't say who or when, but said to me when I asked, why don't you tell the Americans this is very dangerous for Europe and stop the NATO expansion and let's have diplomacy and so forth. And the answer was, they treat us like children in Washington. This was a substantial European leader. And I thought, oh my God, hell, come on. Don't let yourself be treated like a child by Washington. Washington's filled with children, but you have to act like the grown-up there and say, no, that's a bad idea. And that's not happening right now. It didn't, and the commission, oh, please, this is also just awful, because Borrell was with your foreign minister, not a diplomat. He was an arms dealer. Yeah. He was out there just trying to round up armaments. Come on, Joseph, your job is diplomacy. Go talk to Lavrov. That's your job. And it continues with Kallas right now. They love to go. I don't know what they love. I shouldn't say that. They fly off to Kyiv all the time. But what about Moscow? That's where you have to do the negotiations.
Yeah, it's funny that, for example, reporters like Tucker Carlson go to Putin, go to Lavrov, talk to them, and not Biden or the administration. It's ridiculous, actually.
I know Foreign Minister Lavrov for 30 years now, and he was ambassador at the UN. He's a long-standing foreign minister. I knew him from the early reform days. He's incredibly sharp, extremely knowledgeable, extremely capable. And what does it mean? It means you really can have a very serious discussion, negotiation, problem solving with him, because you can raise all the issues. There are lots of important issues to raise, by the way. I don't want to make it seem trivial. I want NATO enlargement to stop, and I want Ukraine to be safe for however the boundaries are drawn at that point. So the question of guarantees, for example, is real. And then Europe right now and the US, they say it's got to be this, it's got to be that, because we can't trust the Russians and so forth. And I have a very basic recommendation, which the diplomats don't follow and don't want to listen to, which is, okay, you're asking a good question. What is the security route? Why don't you ask the Russian side their view of this?
Yeah.
Ask President Putin, ask Foreign Minister Lavrov, how is Ukraine going to be safe after the terms of the deal? Okay, NATO won't enlarge. We accept that. There will be whatever boundaries. We accept that. But then what? And what's their view? I don't know what their view is, because we haven't engaged in diplomacy with it. Maybe they have an answer and you say, but Sergei, that doesn't make sense. What about this and that? He's smart. He'll give an answer. There will be an interchange.
Yeah.
That's what we need more than anything.
Yeah. But actually, I have the hope that now with the new administration, there will be diplomacy. For example, Putin was on a TV statement a couple of days ago when he said he's open-minded for discussions, for debates, and it's very actually positive, I think. And Trump said he will end the war in the first 100 days, and we know he's a deal maker, so we will see if he...
It's possible. Let me just say what's also true, because we talked a lot about the deep state. Trump will hear a lot of contrary arguments in the coming days. A lot of people will come up to him and say, don't look weak, don't threaten the alliance, don't do this, this will look bad vis-a-vis China. All the usual arguments of the CIA and the deep state, he'll hear all of this. Many people that he's appointed are just the normal members.
Will he fall for it? That's the question.
The normal members of the Washington blob.
Yeah.
In the end, a president can't do everything alone. He needs a team. So it's possible that he gets this right, but it's not sure.
Yeah.
And so it's really, of course, I'm going to keep speaking and trying to encourage, don't give in to what is that long narrative that goes back for 30 years that they will try to pull you to.
Of course.
And this is really a possibility. Putin made a statement that I think a lot of people know now, but I found it an ingenious statement, actually, in an interview in Figaro in 2017. He said, I've dealt with 3 U.S. presidents by now. They come into office with interesting ideas, but then the men in the dark suits and blue ties show up, and they explain to the president what the reality is, and then you never hear those ideas again.
Again, true.
This is really the risk that America's a system. It's not just a personality. It's not just an instinct of a president. It's a complicated, very deeply established CIA, Pentagon, Armed Services Committees, National Security Administration or Agency, National Security Council in the White House. There are a lot of people around. They've been on a particular course for a very, very long time. It reminds me, I wrote a book about Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And Kennedy gave a speech about peace that I regard as the greatest speech by an American president in modern history. And it was the speech that inspired Khrushchev to say, okay, let's sign the deal. Because the speech was a wonderful speech saying the other side wants peace, the Russian people have great valor, culture. He praised the other side.
Very
he didn't
clever,
denigrate
very
it.
smart.
And there, 6 weeks later, there's the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. But the interesting thing is Kennedy, President of the United States, was absolutely afraid of circulating the draft of the speech inside the U.S. bureaucracy.
Because
he wouldn't show it to the State Department, to the Pentagon, to the CIA, to anybody until the day before, basically. He and his speechwriter, Ted Sorensen, crafted it, and then at the last moment, they showed it to the others because Kennedy wanted to give it, and he didn't want the deep state to bother him about it. And he gave it. Maybe they bothered him in November afterwards because a lot of people think that it was his peace initiative that cost him his life. And it very well could have been. Yeah. But the fact of the matter is that here you have a president that knows, I can't even circulate my speech inside. And so when you ask, what is Trump going to do? Yeah. You know, Trump's an old guy, an old man. Of course, he's experienced as a president now. But he was bamboozled by his aides in the first term. Yeah. And he had some terrible aides. One of my least favorite American quote-unquote diplomats, because there's nothing diplomatic about him, is John Bolton.
Yeah, warmonger.
Yeah, horrible. Complete warmonger. And he wrote his memoirs, and he brags about how he tricked the president to get Trump to do this or that by a manipulation. And Trump got back a couple days ago. He took away the security clearance of Bolton. So, but you know, here aides trick their leaders, and maybe they manipulated Biden the same way because you know Biden's not all with it, so they're making decisions for him.
There was yesterday a German TV show, and Bolton was called in for an interview about Trump the first days, and he was bad-mouthing about Trump. He's dangerous, he is an idiot. Of course he's saying that because he fired him and he took away his Secret Service, and so he was really pissed. Yeah, and people asked themselves, okay, why do you invite him? Everybody knows he hates him, he's his enemy. So, because it wasn't objective, you know. If you want to have somebody who talks about the US,
and that guy's record, Bolton's record, is so bad.
Yeah,
and he has messed up so many times.
The Middle East.
Why would
he blew up?
Why would you, at North Korea? Why would you listen to this guy for one moment, except to think I'll do the opposite?
Exactly. Yeah, he blew up the whole Middle East actually till today, and so he's actually the guy who started wars, and he is deep state #1, I would say. So, do you think Donald Trump will declassify the files of JFK, and you think the deep state killed him? That's why it's still kept secret?
He said again that he would just a couple days ago.
Because I think also Donald Trump made some really smart decisions, actually. For example, I was surprised about the new Minister of Health, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., for example. So I have the hope that he will break deep state. And we will...
So, you know, one of the most important nominations, which of course is therefore being heatedly contested by the deep state, is the director of national intelligence, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, whom I know well, like enormously, respect enormously, and she is an honest person with high integrity, and they're terrified of her. Can you imagine someone with integrity at the top of the intelligence service? Because there are secrets galore. And so this question of the Kennedy files, for example, you know, after a lifetime, this is 62 years ago, Kennedy's assassination, 61 and a half years ago, and thousands of books and articles have been written, and I've read a lot and have studied a lot. And there's no doubt that there was never a true investigation, that the Warren Commission was a sham. Yeah. And when you have a sham, you have a lot of reason to believe that the sham is a cover-up. Yeah, and when there's a cover-up, you have a lot of reason to believe that people in authority had a role in this, which is my own belief. And there's a lot of, there even are deathbed confessions and so forth, all you know, pushed away, but there's a lot of cumulative evidence. Now here we are with the Warren Commission. We're 61 years after the Warren Commission, 1964, and there are still documents not released till now when everything was supposed to be released. Biden didn't release them. Trump won during the first Trump term. He wanted to release them, and his CIA director,
stopped him.
Pompeo, said, no, they're not being released. something's there, even
they hide something
in the files.
Yeah.
So that's that one. Bobby Kennedy Sr., who was my first political love in the United States, it's not understood, and it's a very weird thing. You know, when he was shot, June 4th, 1968, in the kitchen of the hotel where he was celebrating the victory of his California primary win, Sirhan held a gun and shot, no doubt. But the coroner, who was an extremely skilled and respected coroner, said, no doubt, Kennedy was killed from behind, not in front. And all of us, I'll speak for myself, but I think for almost all Americans, the fact that there was clearly a gunman in front, it seemed an open and shut case, and it was treated that way. It took me decades to go back to read in detail the forensics, which I did, and it blew me away. The eyewitness accounts, the autopsy, the fact that there were flash burns on the back of Kennedy's head, which meant that the gun muzzle was right up to his neck, and Sirhan was several feet in front of him. And there were lots of eyewitnesses that said there were multiple people with guns, and people ran out yelling, "We shot him." The police department, the LAPD, closed down the entire investigation with one of the lead investigators linked to the CIA as typical, and they shut down witness after witness after witness after witness. I didn't know that for decades. I did not understand that because I thought, well, Kennedy, John Kennedy's assassination's one thing, but Robert, it seemed kind of a clear-cut case, but it's absolutely not only not clear-cut, the forensics are even more clear that the official story is pure bullshit.
So it was execution.
And, yeah, so we could see a lot. And by the way, if we do, there's so many things you'd like to know. I'm a little curious, by the way, frankly, although I think I know. Who blew up Nord Stream?
Yeah, that was my next question, actually.
Yes.
Is this part of the Heartland plan, actually, to hurt Russia?
Yeah.
Please elaborate.
Look, I mean, who blew up Nord Stream? The Chancellor should tell us. He knows.
He's covering it up as well. So
yeah, he should tell us. Honestly, he should tell the German people. He should tell the world. We should
Putin,
know.
Of course.
The United States, I don't know. I don't know if it's 50 politicians or 100 politicians, including President Biden himself on February 7th, 2022, with Chancellor Scholz there.
On his side. Yes.
On his side, asked by a reporter, what will you do if Russia invades? We will end the pipeline. Oh, Mr. President, how will you do it? We have our ways. Can we be grown-ups? Honestly, can we be grown-ups? I was asked to testify in the UN Security Council about what to do. I said, investigate this. Well, that was too much for the Security Council because the United States said, no, we don't need investigation. France, we don't need investigation. UK, we don't need investigation. Denmark and Germany and Sweden are going to investigate, and we should wait to find the findings. Close files. So this kind of game is going to get us all killed. Unless we understand we need honesty, we need transparency, we need to be straightforward, we need not to be children. We're playing with nuclear weapons. We're playing with people's lives. We cannot go on playing games, saying stupid things, being blind to obvious facts, and thinking that this is okay.
Yeah, I agree with you right there, and I'm actually pretty surprised that Putin is so mellow, actually, because they destroyed it, and we all know who it was. And Seymour Hersh also wrote an article about it. He was also on my channel. I did an interview with him, which went viral actually in Germany, and we still don't know who did it, and the German government doesn't care. It looks like they doesn't care.
Yeah,
so
it's amazing. I have. Okay, the U.S. did it. Whether it was the U.S. did it, okay. But in any event, there may have been others that did part of the diving and so forth. But the U.S. did it, okay. It's obvious, but you can't say it. So I was on Bloomberg television soon after this, and I said, and by the way, the U.S. blew up the pipeline, most likely. And they sputtered, and the anchor fumed, and I saw smoke coming out of his ears, and they closed me down. And I've never been back. I've never been back on mainstream U.S. television from that moment.
Okay.
I have many.
You're always welcome here.
Yeah, thank you. Many ways to have my views heard, and they do get heard. But the mainstream, they could not engage in 30 seconds of an honest exchange.
Yeah, but they have to keep alive the phony narrative.
I know. And there's somebody put together a wonderful compilation after the pipeline was blown up, and about 100 talking heads on U.S. media say, "Well, it must have been the Russians. Must have been the Russians. Must have been the Russians."
Exactly.
Are you kidding? This is the game that they play. But I just, I like games, especially when I was 12. But as a grown-up, I don't like these games. I used to play the game of Risk. The game of Risk was put your piece on every part of the world map. But come on, Brzezinski, that's a game. That's not the real world. Don't get us all killed.
It's a dangerous game, yeah, very much. You said that Putin mentioned in 2017 that every president who went into the Oval Office and had great ideas came out after a couple of days and the ideas were gone.
Even, by the way, sometimes from morning till afternoon, because Putin tells stories that the president would agree to something, say, that's a good idea. And then in the afternoon, they would explain, no, that's impossible.
I forgot about that. So what makes you sure that, for example, Tulsi Gabbard or Robert F. Kennedy don't get inhaled from the system as well, and they come out in a couple of weeks and they change their mind 180 degrees, or like Annalena Baerbock would say, 360 degrees?
Yes, if they get changed 360 degrees, that'll be fine.
I wouldn't mind.
Exactly. They won't. If they get in, there's a lot of attempt to keep them out. But if they get in, they won't. These are good, honest, decent people.
You said
and Bobby's a classmate of mine. We went to college together. We've known each other for 50 years. He's a really good person, and he's known for a long time. His dad was killed, and he learned over time that what he was told about that was not true, and that's a pretty damn painful thing. So he wants to know the truth.
Okay, so he wants to fight for it.
He wants to know the truth, and for very good reason. We all want to know the truth.
Yeah.
If the truth is known, and if they haven't destroyed all the documents, by the way, because look, the CIA is the CIA, so what's there, who knows? But if the truth comes out, and it is the dark truth, as there's a lot of reason to believe, it would save America to know it, by the way.
But it would change the world.
It would change the world, and it would save America to know it.
Definitely.
And, Bob Dylan's song, Murder Most Foul, about the Kennedy assassination is like a lot of Dylan. Great, in my view, but it basically, the theme of it is that America, that was the turning point. That was the moment where America lost it. And there's a lot of truth in that. And Americans, you see even in the historical surveys of public trust, that's when things collapsed.
Yeah.
Because people knew that they were lied to about something before their very eyes.
What do you make of the pardons Biden gave just the last couple of minutes in his administration for his whole family, for Hunter Biden, and especially for Anthony Fauci?
The Hunter Biden stuff was pretty shoddy stuff.
Yeah.
We've had, by the way, and Biden, maybe for his son or maybe for him, maybe because he's a jerk, maybe, I don't know what, but he definitely knew the son was doing bad stuff.
Yeah.
And he was playing with it and getting prosecutors in Ukraine fired and so forth. There really is a lot of crap involved in that. So it's pretty unpleasant. And okay, he pardoned everybody for that. But the Fauci one is the really.
But 10 years back, all of them, the Biden family and Fauci, back until 2014. That's when actually the war in Donbass, Ukraine started. That's when the Wuhan laboratories.
Well, you know, the thing with of course, the war in Ukraine started with the coup that overthrew Yanukovych, and Biden was part of that.
Yeah.
Blinken was part of that. Jake Sullivan was part of that. Victoria Nuland, now my colleague at Columbia University, for heaven's sake, she was part of that. And that was a typical regime change operation, which is you stir up things, you provoke, you side with the. Can you imagine? Suppose that there were protests here in Germany over something, and then American senators show up to root on the protesters calling for the end of the government. Can you imagine this?
We had it in Georgia, actually. There was German politicians who went on the streets in Georgia and said, oh, democracy, democracy.
Yeah, by the way, oh my God. Yes, exactly. Politicians should stay out of each other's countries and not do this game. Yeah. This is very dangerous. Yeah. And it's very dangerous in Russia's neighborhood. And believe me, the CIA understands where Georgia is, understands where Chechnya is, understands what provocations are all about. Don't play into this.
It's a game.
So, but to come back to Fauci, it's very interesting for me because this is another awful part of this story, this question, where did COVID come from?
Yeah. You were very vocal about it very early, that you thought it's from a lab.
No, I started, I was asked by the major English language global health journal, the Lancet, to chair a commission on COVID, not mainly about the origin question, but mainly about how do we fund the response and other economic aspects of it. But part of the work of that commission was, where did the virus come from?
Exactly.
And at the beginning, I thought it was natural because I had studied viruses for a long time, and there are lots of natural spillovers, so-called zoonotic events.
Yeah.
And I did something that first I thought was clever, then I thought was unbelievably stupid, and now I think was actually clever in its odd way. What I did was
you made a 360.
Yes, it's exactly a 360. I asked somebody named Peter Daszak, who was collecting bats and bat viruses for the U.S. government, to lead the team inside the commission to investigate where the virus came from. Now, it turns out that Daszak was deeply involved with the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and Daszak's organization called EcoHealth Alliance is central to this story of the origins. So I started believing, well, this is natural. Let's find out from the guy who collects the bats and the bat viruses. And then after about 8 months, a number of scientists independently explained to me, Jeff, grow up a little bit, open your eyes, understand what this is about, read some journal articles, and so forth. And I said, whoa, that's interesting.
Yeah.
We've been funding exactly the kind of research that aimed to produce a virus exactly like this, especially with a piece of the virus that was a kind of telltale sign of manipulation in the laboratory, something called the furin cleavage site. And that was the object of US government-funded research in 2017, 2018, 2019, and in fact, going back a long way, exactly the research of the people that I had asked to investigate. So I looked into it, I asked them questions, they were secretive, they were dishonest with me and so forth, so I fired them from the commission. And I learned a lot in the interim because there were lots of lawsuits that released new documents, there were whistleblowers and so forth. And I will tell you as a summary that I think it's 98, 99% that this came out of a lab.
Yeah.
And not just out of a lab, but out of a US lab, and even a US lab at University of North Carolina, because that was the person that was doing this. And I think that there's a pretty good understanding of that this virus that was deliberately manipulated was being tested in China in a bat colony at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So there are a lot of details. There's a lot that we don't know. What do we know? We know that there was a cover-up. We know that it was falsified. We know that Tony Fauci spoke bullshit. We know that he did not tell the truth. We know that the first scientific paper declaring that it was natural, called The Proximal Origins of SARS-CoV-2. SARS-CoV-2 is the name of the virus. And this was an article in Nature journal in March 2020, saying it's a natural virus, natural spillover, was phony. It wasn't even what the authors believed. It was a setup to escape from accountability. We know that now, but still we don't know a lot of the papers that the CIA has collected, that the FBI has collected, Department of Energy. There was an internal investigation, and we got a one-page report, because that's how the deep state operates. My own view, as I say, overwhelmingly likely that this came out of a US lab, University of North Carolina. It was being tested in Wuhan. It probably accidentally escaped during this experimentation. And a lot, it's not the Chinese cover-up, it's the US that needs to come forward. And we could know a lot more. Just as an example, the University of North Carolina released a lot of papers out of the emails, thousands of emails out of the laboratory of the scientist who was leading this effort, except not during 2019. So the period you need to look at, they released it up to 2019 and after 2020 started. Huh? What about the period we're interested in? No, that's still in the lawsuit. Well, come on. Are we
so
kidding?
Obvious, so obvious.
This epidemic took the life of perhaps 20 million people around the world. We don't even have the gumption to try to understand what happened, honestly.
Yeah, it's horrible. And it took actually also the quality of life. You know, we lost our rights in Germany. We had lockdowns.
No,
kids had to wear the mask in the school.
But to me, it keeps coming back. I'm sorry to say, maybe because I'm an old guy. I just expect grown-ups to behave like grown-ups. You have a pandemic, we better understand this. You have an assassination, what happened? You have a war, how did that happen? You had a coup, we better understand this. If we fake everything, how ever are we going to survive?
Yeah, but this is the deep state again, because they have their own interests in mind.
I know, but you know,
it's about
their
power and money.
Their interest is not my interest.
I know.
I'm an American citizen.
You just...
I know, but we can't keep our politics for the sake of the deep state. Our politics has to be the sake of my granddaughters and my grandson.
But if,
this is period.
But if you, like, for example, Biden, I guess they had something against him for about Hunter Biden, about his connections to Ukraine or something like that. Perhaps they just said, okay, if you don't do this, then we show the pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's how it works, I guess. By the way, aren't you scared if you say very loudly and vocal what you think about deep state, that they not only censor you from the mainstream media, but also perhaps go for you?
No, not really, because it's an interesting thing. What they're interested in is not that anyone believes them. They're just interested that they have a story. It's very interesting. You know, no one believes the Warren Commission report. Overwhelmingly, Americans believe the virus came out of a lab.
Yeah, true.
They don't care.
Okay.
They just want deniability. They don't want actually to convince anyone. Why? Because no one has a say, actually, in the actual decisions. It's not like we have a democracy where the public opinion shapes the foreign policy. No. The foreign policy, we don't know who shaped it. Was it Jake Sullivan's decision to allow the attack of missiles? Who did it? We don't even know. Maybe it was Biden. But the point is, if it was Biden, it was one person. It wasn't a vote of Congress. Nothing's a vote of anybody. Nothing's about public opinion. So in this sense, maybe they're amused at all the chatter. Maybe they're annoyed by the chatter. But for them, it's chatter.
Okay, so they never try to blackmail you or threaten to you? Okay.
No, I don't think they care.
Yeah. Okay. You think the regime change in Syria was also a deep state?
Well, that we know.
That we know?
No, that's not even that's not even a question. We know, and again, I knew it at the time, though I didn't know the details. But in 2011, Obama and now my colleague at Columbia University, Hillary Clinton. No, Hillary Clinton
Hillary
in this
Clinton
case. She's also at Columbia.
Okay, they all come there.
Yeah, we have a great, great faculty. They said publicly one day, Bashar al-Assad must go. And I was on television that day when I was still on mainstream television. I was on Morning Joe. And I said, what? We're saying that the Syrian president has to go? That's a good one. How are you going to do that? And of course, what we then learned afterwards, there was an uprising. Okay. Oh, there's a free Syrian army. Okay. Think CIA always when you see this. These are not spontaneous events. Wars and armies are expensive. They need to be trained. They need to be armed. They need to be provisioned. This is not some spontaneous thing. This is organized. We know now, in retrospect, because we didn't know formally for a number of years, this was what's called a presidential finding. Obama signed a secret document called Operation Timber Sycamore, a CIA operation. It tasked the CIA with the overthrow of the Syrian government. Come on, I'll say it again, grow up. That's their government. Yeah. That's not your government. By the way, Europe had a crisis of Syrian refugees.
I know.
In the 2010s, it was the height of politics. How many people here said, God damn, why did the United States try to overthrow that government and overrun us with refugees? Precisely nobody, because nobody made the link of connecting the dots to a CIA operation. But of course that's what it was. Syria was not an unstable country. You go back in 2008 and read the IMF report. The IMF authorities congratulate the Syrian government on their macroeconomic management and see the prospects for years of economic growth ahead. That's what the document says.
Yeah.
But then they decided to bring down the government. Why? My theory, Israel. My theory, and again with lots of backing, Netanyahu says, take down that one, take down that one, take down that one, because Assad supported Hamas. Assad supported Hezbollah. Netanyahu's idea is, well, if you support these pro-Palestinian militants, we got to overthrow you. What does he do? He can't overthrow them. He turns back to Uncle Sam, to the United States, said overthrow them. And then they overthrow them. But then there's a European refugee crisis and all the rest. But we shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. Now, I'll tell you an interesting story. The U.S. decided to overthrow the government. This is what I call a bullshit policy, because you should not do this. It fails. It destabilizes. It brought us 14 years of war, and now whatever there is in Syria, we don't know, but likely ongoing violence, in my guess. But in any event, it brought complete instability. In 2012, the UN tried to broker a peace. I know absolutely that the U.S. stopped that. The U.S. did not want peace. I know it. It's not even a close call. I know that all the other parties agreed to a peace, and one blocked it, and that was the U.S. government. And how do I know? I know, because I know how the negotiations were done, and I know what happened. And then there were another 13 years of war, hundreds of thousands of people dead, millions of refugees. Can we learn not to do this? Can we learn that this is really not good stuff? Enough wars. Could we have a diplomat as foreign minister? This is the question.
Yeah. Do you think it has something to do with the famous quote from General Wesley Clark, who said 7 countries in 5 years?
Of course. This was number 2. It wasn't quite number 2. It's a little more complicated. Netanyahu and his advisors and the U.S. side, the neocons, listed 7 countries that were going to be overthrown. And they were Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Iran, Sudan, Libya, and Somalia. So those are the 7. And the U.S. has been actively engaged in war with 6. And I know from a senior U.S. military official who read all of the background documents and talked to all of the people involved that this was real and that it was going to happen quickly, and that the U.S. invaded Iraq as part of this plan in 2003, and then, to their shock, got bogged down in the local insurrection. They did not expect that. They knew that they'd defeat Saddam and take him down right away, and they thought they would move straight to Syria next. And Iran was towards the end of the chain. They got bogged down because of all of the anti-U.S. forces and the IEDs and so on, and they lost the time. When Obama came into office, he picked up the story, and Syria was next. Libya was also same year. I know, by the way, I knew Gaddafi a little bit, and I know a lot of leaders that watched that close up. That was a completely contrived overthrow the same way. Hillary again, Obama again. It said Obama was a little bit reticent, that Sarkozy really wanted this, maybe because Gaddafi had funded Sarkozy's campaign. Who knows whether it was personal, whether it was policy, whether it was Netanyahu, we don't know, but it was contrived. It actually violated the terms of a UN Security Council resolution, which was aimed at protecting Benghazi, but they used that as the pretext for NATO bombing to overthrow Gaddafi. The U.S. Broke apart Sudan, actively supporting internal civil war. Now there are 2 civil wars, one in Sudan and one in South Sudan. They actively supported the intervention of Ethiopia and Somalia. In other words, they actively supported Israeli action in Lebanon. In other words, out of the list of 7, there have been 6 wars, and Netanyahu just, every day he just can't wait to try to get the U.S. into a war in Iran.
You think it will happen?
No.
Why?
Because it would be the end of the Trump administration. They just can't do it.
But you think if the Biden administration would still be in place, or Harris would have won, that we had a war with?
Yeah, odds on.
Okay.
Yeah, because the Biden administration was pathetic. We don't know who was running it, but between Blinken and Sullivan,
a puppet.
Why not? So I think it would have been more likely. It's not impossible. Trump is surrounded by people who will tell him to go to war. But you know what? On that one, I don't think he will, because Iran is more than 90 million people. It's a powerful country. It's got hypersonic weapons, and it just signed a security agreement with Russia. I mean, it's another perfect powder keg for World War III. So, by the way, I hope any government in Germany would tell the United States, for God's sake, do not go to war with Iran.
It would be a suicide commando, of course.
It would be absolutely, again, right up there on the list of unbelievably reckless things to do. This one I don't think Trump is going to fall into.
And we definitely can hope that Tulsi Gabbard or Robert F. Kennedy Jr. or Donald Trump that did not get inhaled from deep state and change their mind the next couple of days or weeks, that they really stay on the course for peace. And
I think on this one, Trump will, I'm guessing, but of course we're all guessing, but I think he'll sense, my God, that could torpedo every single thing he wants to do.
I think he learned from his first term, actually, that he changed the bad advisors, and he's looking for the people right now. So we hope for the best. Let's talk about China. Do you think China is a threat to the US?
No. Why? How could it be?
Yeah, because there is also the narrative, of course, in the media very often, also from the people from the deep state, that we have to take care about China. They're getting too big. They're dangerous. We need tariffs and so on.
Nope. I don't see anything to be afraid of with China. Anything at all. Could they invade the United States? No. There is no security threat. Could we blow each other up? Of course we could. But other than that, as long as we keep a distance and respect each other's red lines, I don't see any threat whatsoever. Now, what does it mean to respect each other's red lines? I think it would be really a bad idea for China and Mexico to agree that China would open a military base on the Rio Grande. Bad idea. I would strongly advise China against it. I don't think that in a million years they would ever think about doing it. But similarly, I think it's a terrible idea for the US to be arming Taiwan. I think it's completely reckless and provocative, and it will get Taiwan into the same deadly situation as Ukraine. And there are actually a lot of people in the United States who think, expect, and some even want a war with China over Taiwan, or expect a war with China by 2027 is the date that's given.
From whom?
From people in Washington. There's, for example, a new Navy Department document. Doesn't say we will have a war with China. It says we must prepare for war with China by 2027.
Crazy.
It actually says that in the document. I can't stand that. How, again, could grown-ups think about this? And I don't want to leave diplomacy to these generals anymore, these admirals and so forth. This is mind-boggling. There is no threat except if we make it so. And, of course, unfortunately, in the United States, there's the propensity to say, well, call their bluff. Or that's not a red line, or we do what we want. That's been the American hubris. And if they do that with respect to China, it would be pretty devastating. The simple fact of the matter is, by the way, if there were a war, God help the United States. This is many thousands of miles across the Pacific, and there just ain't no way that the United States would prevail in such a war.
So, Professor Sachs, how can we make diplomacy great again?
We make diplomacy great again by having governments in Europe that are not afraid to tell the truth. and that are not afraid of the United States and that are absolutely interested in European security and that are wise enough to know you don't make security by going off in an arms race. You make security through processes like the OSCE, through processes of collective security, through listening to the other side, through diplomacy. And to my mind, this is the most important thing. Europe lost its voice after 2008. It needs to find its voice again.
So you say Europe has to emancipate against the US again, has to grow up, has to...
Europe has to grow up. It has more than 2,000 years of direct experience. It knows how important peace is. It figured that out decades ago, and it should apply the lesson broadly in Europe. The OSCE, which became a dead letter, is a wonderful idea. It brought together all of Europe, Eastern Europe, Central Europe, Western Europe. It had the idea of collective security. You don't make security at someone else's expense. It was the opposite of the NATO idea that there's our side and then there's the enemy side. And Europe needs to get back to a united Europe with mutual security. But that means talking with Russia. That means dealing with Russia. That means solving problems with Russia.
Yeah, but that needs new politicians, I guess, in Europe, in Germany, of course, because Germany is the powerhouse, still the powerhouse in the European Union. And
it needs people to speak honestly, who know the story, and to reflect on the fact that, that peace is always possible, because otherwise we're going to blow ourselves up.
Yeah, I've got hope in the new Trump administration and also in the new president of Argentina, Javier Milei. He's also an economist, so perhaps there's still hope for you to become president of the United States as an economist. I would love to see you there in the Oval Office. And
spare me, and spare the American people.
Yeah, I don't think it's that bad. But what's your take on Javier Milei and his policies as a colleague?
All I can say is I've been involved with Argentina. I'm a monetary economist in my training, in my PhD, in my experience. I actually worked with many Argentine governments in the past. I've watched inflation soar up. I've watched inflation come down. I've watched it go up and go down. Argentina has been unstable for 200 years. It is... I call them the greatest monetary geniuses in the world because they've done every single thing you can do to money imaginable. They've added more zeros, subtracted more zeros, introduced new currencies, stabilized the currencies, floated the currencies. They've done everything. But what they have not done is been consistent for several years. And that's what I hope Mr. Milei, President Milei will be, and what I hope Argentina could be. You know, I go often. It's actually a wonderful country.
I love it.
It's a very beautiful, very productive, very intelligent people, very wonderful place. But my God, the economics have been awful. And one thing to understand, you know, if a country has lived through dozens, literally dozens of crises. Germany had one hyperinflation. It was, of course, a trauma that has lasted until today in its impact. Argentina has had multiple hyperinflations. When you've had that experience, you're always sitting at the edge. Your money's always ready to flee. You're always ready to panic. So the country's always at the knife edge between stability and panic. No fault of any particular government, the fault of history. So they bear the burden of 2 centuries of monetary instability. No one trusts the peso, whichever peso it happens to be. And so to get consistency and win trust over the long term has been the elusive goal. and let's hope that this government does it.
Yeah, definitely. I pray for that because I love Argentina. I used to live there. You as a monetary economist, what's your take on Bitcoin?
I am a big fan of digital currencies, but I'm not a lover of cryptocurrencies.
Okay.
And the reason is I'm kind of an old-fashioned guy. I believe that seigniorage belongs to the state.
Okay.
And that means that the right to print money is a public function, not a private function. And I ask myself a question. Bitcoin now is, the market cap is, last time I checked, was a couple $1 trillion. I don't know exactly where the decimal point is now. Bitcoin per se did not add, it's an ingenious thing, and blockchain's ingenious and so forth, but Bitcoin did not add $2 trillion of wealth. There is $2 trillion of wealth in the market, but what does that mean? It means someone else's purchasing power, someone else's wealth is a bit eaten up on the margin by Bitcoin because the real economy of the world didn't change. It's not, Bitcoin is not a great settlements mechanism. It's not really a payments mechanism. It's an investment, and it doesn't increase the productivity of the economy or the stock of material wealth. It's a financial asset. And so if 2 trillion of purchasing power is there, how? Well, the dollar's worth a little bit less than it used to be. There's a little bit more inflation. There's currency substitution. There's substitution from other financial assets and other amounts of wealth. To my mind, a little bit, I think you're a fan of Bitcoin, and many people are, and many people own Bitcoin, but to me, it's a little bit like someone coming up and saying, I have this wonderful printing press. It's so much like the US Mint, you can't believe it. The bills are perfect. They really are great. And then the US government saying, wow, wonderful, well, go for it. No, we'd say that's counterfeiting, go to jail. Now, Bitcoin isn't counterfeiting, but it is a little bit eating up my wealth. You know, my wealth is in US dollars. I don't know.
Yeah, and the dollar devalues and Bitcoin.
I don't own any Bitcoin, but suddenly there's $2 trillion competing with me and with the rest of the world for purchasing goods and services off the shelves and so forth. So I have to admit, I'm not a fan of that. If Bitcoin had invented a great new settlement system that really made settlements more efficient, that wouldn't be a new currency. That would be a financial innovation that I'd be all for. So to come back, blockchain's ingenious, no question. Yeah. A decentralized ledger is really a clever device. Mining Bitcoin, not so much. It's eaten up a lot of energy. We used to say in economics, mining gold was an incredible waste. You could just have paper, but instead you have people going into mines and digging, and what a waste. But with Bitcoin, in this sophisticated age, we're actually using up real energy, emitting real CO2, and not to a small extent. So what I like is, I'd like to move beyond the current banking sector. I'd like to move beyond the current payment system. I like digital currencies. Okay. So efficient. I'd like our central banks, a digital euro, a digital dollar, a digital renminbi. This would, and we already do it basically.
Actually,
we Venmo, but make it the payments mechanism. That I'm all in favor of. Okay. So I don't want to stop any financial innovation, but I'm a little concerned that you don't get something out of nothing. That's what we think in economics, that there's the real world, and if suddenly there's $2 trillion of purchasing power, doesn't make more of the real world. It takes implicitly from someone else.
From the US dollar, from fiat currencies.
The US dollar, from whichever currencies it's substituting for, whichever assets it's substituting for. Exactly.
Okay. So my last question to you, Mr. Sachs, is what is the meaning of life for Jeffrey Sachs?
Well, I was lucky when I was young that my parents wanted me to see a little bit of the world. Not a little bit. I mean, they were. We grew up in a middle-class household in the United States, and they worked very hard.
Which state, may I ask?
In Michigan, in Motown, Motor City. And they wanted me to see the world and understand things, so I'm really grateful for that. And when I was 16, we did something completely unusual at the time. And that was we went to the Soviet Union in 1970.
What?
Yes, and this was almost not done. And the really interesting thing about it was that as I was sitting in a lounge chair like this in the lobby of the Ukraina Hotel in Moscow, a young man from the GDR, from East Berlin, came up to me to practice his English. And we sat down and we started to discuss, and then I was called and I said, exchange names and addresses, and we became what you did in those days was pen pals.
Cool.
That means you wrote out a letter, you licked it, you put the stamp on, you sent it off, and once every 2 weeks I'd get a letter from this wonderful young man. And in 1972, he invited me to come to his house. So I arrived in Berlin, and I went through Checkpoint Charlie, and I stayed for 2 weeks in East Berlin, near Alexanderplatz. And he took me to Potsdam, and he took me around, and we went to Dresden and so forth.
Marvelous.
And he told me about the wonders of socialism. And I was a high school kid who knew nothing about any of this. And so I was fascinated by
socialism or the GDR?
I was fascinated by the fact that this place is different from my country. I don't even understand. My country was, I didn't know how to answer. I didn't know anything. So I went back to start university, and I said, I'm going to study this. So that was 53 years ago. And you asked me, I've been studying the same thing since then. I've been trying to understand how the world fits together. Now I've seen about 150 countries and have worked with governments all over the world, but I'm still trying to figure it out. So for me, what's interesting is we're all on this planet together. We should be friends. We should be amazed at the diversity. We should enjoy the diversity. We don't need to be killing each other. We should be talking with each other, and we should be understanding each other. And that, for me, is the basic point.
Wow, that's a beautiful end of this great interview. I thank you very much, Mr. Sachs. And I have to recommend your book again, Diplomacy or Disaster. And I can't agree more than we have to talk to each other, and you should talk to each other, to your enemies, to your neighbors, to your friends, and be polite and put love out there. And I think the future is great if you just change it today. And I thank you that you talked to me, actually.
It's a great pleasure.
No, it was such an honor, and time just flew by, and I hope we can do this again, and I wish you all the best.
Wonderful. I look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Sachs. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.